Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the first ever 14th episode of Baseball versus the World, a podcast about how baseball relates to the world and how the rest of the world relates to baseball, part of the Just Baseball Media Network. I'm your host, main host, as always, and guide on this vast maiden voyage through the cosmos of all things baseball. Javier Reyes, staff writer here at justbaseball.com, as well as also the host of the Locked On Padres podcast. And here's the thing, I've said it many times. I refuse to not have illustrious guests on the show. Those are the only type of people that I will allow on the show. And today we are joined by two illustrious guests, actually. That's right. For this next episode, August 13th. Hopefully everyone is doing well. I'm being joined by Aaron Fischman, firstly, an author, a very prestigious author, sports writer who has spent the last decade as a writer, editor, and podcast host as well. He's been an award winner from the Los Angeles Press Club. He has a degree because he's a smart guy and a master's degree in digital and print journalism as well from USC. And my second guest is the first ever professional baseball player to ever appear on this very non-professional podcast, Mr. Tony Barnette. He, of course, is the subject that we will be talking about today of Aaron's newest book, A Baseball Gaijin, Chasing a Dream to Japan and Back. He played for the Tokyo Yakult Swallows in the NPB, as well as the Texas Rangers and Chicago Cubs. Gentlemen, that was my longest intro ever. For sure. So let's bring it back down. Yeah, of course, no problem. It's what I do. You know, you have to give respect to the guests, especially if they're going to agree to be on my show, because I know that could be a lot for some people. But both of you, how are you doing on this fine? We're recording this on a Friday, fine afternoon.
Doing well, Javi. Thanks for having us. We really appreciate it.
Same. Excited to do this.
Absolutely, me too. And look, we've done a lot of, for listeners of the podcast and followers and watchers, we've done a lot of interviews before with authors for this show. But we've never done one that is the subject of literally the book and also a former professional player. So I guess firstly, easy cliche question for Aaron, how did this partnership between you two come about exactly?
I could give you a really long answer, but since Tony is on too, and we have a lot of stuff to get through, I'll try to give you the kind of like the elevator pitch version of how we got connected. But so I was an undergrad at UC Davis in Northern California near Sacramento. I was writing for this really small independent website called davissportsdaily.com, long defunct. And I reached out to AA pitchers whose bios I knew nothing about other than they logged innings. They had some good K to walk ratios. And Tony was the only pitcher to respond and agree to be interviewed. This was kind of in the early days of Facebook. We just did transcript interviews at first where I typed some questions and then he would get back to me a few days later. And then we graduated to him writing blog entries for us. He did one when he was invited to Arizona Diamondbacks spring camp. And he crossed paths with guys like Randy Johnson. And then a year later, when he was in Japan, reflecting days after the earthquake and tsunami, just fascinating blogs from him. And we just continued to stay in touch as his story got more and more interesting. But just from the very start, I thought he was just such an interesting, engaging, passionate guy who had a lot of interesting stuff to say. So as his story grew more fascinating over the years, I was so grateful to be able to tell it. And then especially after he signed with the Texas Rangers, to have that opportunity to turn this into a book, I was just over the moon excited. And I'm really happy with how it turned out and grateful for Tony that he was in the front seat for this long ride and just so helpful and collaborative throughout.
Absolutely. Tony, what made you exactly, like, I don't know, I guess want to do this? You know what I mean? As someone who played professional baseball both in Japan and in the major leagues here in the US, what made you exactly want to do this? What makes you wake up one day and you're like, yeah, I'm down to be a part of this collaborative story and get my story told?
Well, it was a long road. I've always been willing and open to talk about baseball, or just about anybody that will listen. I'd probably tell stories to the wall if it includes baseball, if it comes to that. But it really was just a a long road of one interview after another. Had I quit pitching, obviously this had or gotten X'd out of baseball earlier, this never would have came about. And it just really was one interview turning into the next interview to the next story. And then as my story progressed and my journey through the game progressed from AAA to Japan back to the major leagues, Aaron was always just there with questions to ask and, stories to write. So it really never was a plan to get to this part. It just kind of presented itself over the years. And after just about 10 years of Aaron asking questions, he ended up having enough material and an idea for a story that he just kind of looked up. He's like, you know what? I'm going to write a book. I laughed. I thought he was crazy, but he ended up putting in the legwork and, sleepless nights to really, follow through with something that he'd been working on for decades without knowing what the end game really was going to be. So it really wasn't just a one day, hey, let's put this project together. It was something that came about after just having conversations with him over the years. And then finally one day Aaron saying, man, I've got a lot of material here. You've got a good story to write and I'm going to write it.
Absolutely. And Aaron, I'm wondering, like, just 10 plus years, like, look, I'm someone who struggles to write a couple sentences, let alone pages. And you're out here writing a book that you worked on for 10 years. What is that process like? Is it just because, especially for people out there who have no idea, I feel like the book business can be very daunting for people who just have no idea how it works. It just seems like what do? You just go out a typewriter, type a bunch of pages and call it a day. What made you, I guess, key in on after 10 years still being motivated and still wanting to get this story told?
One, I'm a little crazy, but two, I don't know. I'm so passionate about it. I think the story is so fascinating and inspirational, but I don't want to overly romanticize the process and the journey. It's been so challenging. It does feel, even for a writer and a journalist like me, who had access to people and was in the clubhouse, was able to talk to his Rangers teammates and coaches and stuff. It's still really daunting when you have no words on a page. And so I didn't just think, oh, I'm going to write a book just at the very beginning. Like Tony alluded to, I had accumulated a lot of material. And also there were articles. So I didn't say this in my first answer, but for graduate school at USC, so this was back in 2013, for a couple classes, there was an advanced sports reporting class and then also a magazine writing class. So I had a couple stories that I wrote on Tony, where for the first time I was actually interviewing other people important to the story, like Tony's wife, Hillary, Aaron Guile, long teammate with the Swallows, who's now Tony's colleague in the scouting department with the Swallows. So gradually over the years, I was adding sources, adding material, adding research, and one person led to another. For instance, there was this guy, British guy, Yakult Swallows super fan and blogger, David Watkins, who's featured throughout the book. And once I got in touch with him, he was really good at setting me up with various English language websites that ended up being extremely helpful for finding information and stats. Yaku Baka was one of them, and his website, yakultswallows.com also. But so gradually over the days, weeks, months, and years, you accumulate more research, more interviews from all your reporting that you do. And so it just over time becomes less and less intimidating, but I would say it's never really not intimidating until it's out there. And then I think even then I'd be lying, because then you have to actually get the word out there and expose people to this amazing story that you've told, that you're concerned maybe people won't be able to discover on their own. So it's a long, challenging process, but such a rewarding one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine. And I think that, we've talked a lot about the story. We've alluded to it. So before I get back to you, Aaron, on some very as a fellow writer, some very writer-based questions. Tony, let's just talk about kind of the basics of this story, because I think for a lot of people, they see this. They see the premise of the book and they say, wow, this is a guy who Arizona State alum. He goes, instead of potentially staying down that path to make the major leagues, you have this big decision to make, whether or not to go and pitch for Japan, which you ended up doing, of course. Can you take us back to that moment, back then, all the way back in 2006? What kind of is your mindset? What are you weighing? What are the pros and cons? Because I mean, this isn't just, oh, I want to, go to a different restaurant tonight, obviously, right? Like, this is a big time career changing decision. Like, what kind of goes through your head? Can you take us back to that moment?
Right. It happened really quickly. It was just one of those things that once it came about, once I was notified that Japan was interested, things moved along pretty quick in retrospect. But at the time, it was 2009. I was coming off a AAA year where I thought I'd pitching in Reno, which was a heavily, the PCL, especially at the time, those higher elevations, the ball flies. It's a hitter friendly league. I held my own. I did and especially in hindsight now, looking at numbers, I did very well for what was being asked of me in that park. And I thought I was good enough to either get Rule 5 drafted by another team and given my opportunity at the big leagues, or at least given a legitimate shot at winning a spot with the Diamondbacks the next year. Well, the Diamondbacks had other plans and other teams didn't bite on me. So at the time I was sitting there weighing, okay, do I want to go back in AAA and just, roll the dice here? Or do I want to go to Japan and, potentially, and money definitely kicked in. I was getting offered $500,000 as opposed to the $16,000 that I had just made the previous year in AAA Reno. So that was a big driving factor. But a lot of the other things besides that was, I remember asking myself and talking with people that I care about that were giving me, trying to help me make a decision as best I could, was what am I giving up here by leaving? Am I giving up on a dream for some money? Am I giving up on my pursuit of a major league dream for a paycheck? And essentially the answer is yes. I was, but it really, I was like, okay, well, what do I have to lose here? I have an opportunity. If things don't go well, I can come back and still throw my hat in the ring in the United States as long as I'm healthy. So it really was kind of more of a existential kind of, not crisis, but a thought pattern of saying, this is a crossroads in my life. I have an opportunity to explore a different culture and a different game in a different place as opposed to what I'm comfortable with here. So there was family life. I wasn't married yet. I was still 26 years old. My family was here in the States, and it really just came down to, what's the next step for me? And after talking to a lot of people, getting advice from people I trusted within the game and, family members as well, it boiled down to me saying, let's bet on myself once again, and let's head to Japan and try to, develop there and make something of myself over there without possibly, thinking that I had given up on the major league dream, so to speak. But, long and behold, I was able to make my way back and get to throw my hat in the ring with the best players in the world.
Absolutely. I'm wondering, if this isn't too personal, were there people who were like kind of pushing back on this, saying not necessarily because of the money and to be able to play professionally, but just to travel so far away from home? Like, were there a lot of people in your life that's like, hey man, I'm not so sure about this. Maybe you should stick here where you're kind of, you're home?
No. Family members were supportive of me making the best decision for myself as I deemed it. There was a few people, notably Mel Stottlemyre Jr., a pitching coach that I love and revere and respect wholeheartedly. He was one of the few people to be kind of like a naysayer, saying, I don't think you should go. I think you're close enough that you're going to get your opportunity soon. And he could have been right. But I've moved around so much as a youth that jumping from one place to another wasn't anything new for me. And then being a baseball player with a travel ball growing up, and then you getting into the college and leaving home, leaving states, I've lived in so many different places that it really was just another place. It was just another apartment. But obviously there was a lot more. There was a lot more to it when you enter a different country, when you get into the culture and just the just how to survive in that atmosphere, which, I mean, it's Japan. We're not talking about a third world country and, selling all of your, belongings and, moving to Tibet. But it's just, it was something that going to somewhere new wasn't really on my radar as a big deal. I think until the day I left, when, you go and you see the board in LAX saying, flight to Tokyo, and you're like, oh man, like, I'm really doing this. Like, I'm really going across an ocean to go live in a different country for the time being. And so it really, mostly everybody was excited for me. And, nobody really was like, don't do it. There was a few detractors saying, we think you're good enough to stay here and get to the big leagues. But in reality, everybody was supportive of it. And there really wasn't anybody worried about what I was doing.
I'm wondering, when you arrive, what's kind of your first impression? Like, is it intimidating? Because again, brand new culture, brand new language for a lot of people. What is that kind of like? Did you have a moment where you were like, okay, yeah, I'm excited about this, but also sheesh, like this is a lot to kind of, take in.
When you see it in the book, you'll read about it when the first time I step off the plane, and I met with a lot of media, a lot of, flash photography and questions getting thrown at me, and hopefully, and I had a brand new translator there deciphering everything. So I'm looking at the people asking the questions in a language I don't understand, looking at this guy translating it to me. And it was daunting at first, and, it's exciting. You're like, oh man, like I'm getting a lot of action here. I'm getting a lot of attention. People are excited that I'm here, which is something that it was a star treatment for a guy that was coming off of a 14-6 record in AAA, so it was something that was new, something that I hadn't seen that type of attention when it comes to media before. So right away there was this punch in the mouth saying, it's real, you better lock in and get ready. And then obviously you get into the van to head back into Tokyo, and, just staring out the window and getting my bearings of where I'm at, and, just taking in the scenery and taking in the city lights and all that. And then, from there, it was just hit the ground running. There wasn't a real moment to take a breath. It was, hey, we're here to get to work for baseball. So going to the field, meeting some people, then getting on another plane, heading to spring training in Okinawa, and then just hitting the ground running. So there wasn't a lot of time for me to acclimate. It was, you're here, get ready. It's time to play and go prove yourself.
Absolutely. To further on this question, though, I'm wondering, what is something now, of course, we'll dive into the playing career and everything and whatnot and the book, but I'm wondering, kind of, is there something from Japan or in anything that you started to have a greater appreciation for upon visiting?
Over time, one of the things I grew appreciative of, especially in the Japanese way of they play the game, is I always allude to the book by Robert Whiting, You Gotta Have Wa. And it's just this team atmosphere, this team first mentality. And it's, if you're not together as a team, then there's zero chance for you to win. That's something that in hindsight, I look back on and really appreciate. I talked about it recently on a podcast with Jason Grilly, their Mound Visit podcast. And it's just, in the States, it has to be organic, and it only usually happens with winning teams, because there's so many guys coming in and out of the clubhouse throughout the year, trades, DFAs, up and downs, injuries. There's just so many moving parts at the major league level all the time. Whereas in Japan, it doesn't happen as much. There's the up and down guys, but a lot of these guys are with the organization from the very beginning of their career to the very end. Trades aren't as prevalent. Free agency isn't as heavily touted over there. So you see these guys who come up as 17, 18, 19-year-old kids, and they're still playing on the same team together as 36-year-old men, 40-year-old men. So they've been through every bit of life together, the birth of children, marriages, divorces, death of family members, loved ones. Really, you're really a part of a family when you're with people that long, especially no matter what happens in the Japanese game. There's always that feeling of, no matter what happens off the field, like you're going to come to the field and we're all here together and we're all going to fight towards a concerted effort to win. And we're all here to be in it together, win, lose or draw, good or bad. We're going to still all be together and we're going to keep fighting towards the same goal. So to answer your question, like there's just a culture of togetherness. It is, there's a community atmosphere away from the field as well. We saw that after the major earthquake on March 11, 2011, where communities really came together to help one another. There was areas that were obviously the Fukushima area in the Tohoku region was devastated. And one of the things I like to point to in that was people were finding people's belongings everywhere. The floods carried people's homes and livelihoods to places to everywhere. And there was this combined effort to help everybody return family heirlooms and riches and home goods to the rightful owners. There wasn't looting. There wasn't people going in and taking advantage of it. There was just a concerted effort for everybody to chip in and help rebuild what was just destroyed. So there's this community atmosphere on and off the field that I really enjoy, really appreciate, and it's something that I try to point to and try to move forward in my life with that same mentality.
Interesting.
Go ahead.
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're good.
Oh no, I was just gonna note on just piggying back on that answer. Tony is still part of the Swallows organization, which we could talk about later. But that goes to show you just how close knit NPB organizations can be. He never left, or he left, but he came back.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. It's kind of one of the things I love about sports, I think, is just, and obviously baseball especially, is just that it seems like it's a universal language. You know what I mean? Everyone can relate to it. And it seems like that's kind of a little bit of what's going on here. Aaron, I'm wondering, when it comes to chronicling this journey from Arizona State, all the way to, into the minor leagues, then to Japan, then back to the major leagues, what do you think was the most challenging part of chronicling this journey?
That's an interesting question.
Probably dealing with me.
No, it was a walk in the park. No, I'm just kidding. Did that sound sarcastic? No. Some of the early, I guess, Japanese seasons were a little bit more difficult because at times I was writing about it or interviewing people a little bit farther removed from it. And then at a certain point, a couple of these websites that I was so reliant on that I mentioned earlier, Yakubaka and TokyoSwallows.com was a lot more recently that it went dead once I was pretty much done with writing the book. But it's disappointing when there are a few finite sources in English where you're getting a lot of your information or where you used to fact check, and then they're starting to disappear. And that just happens just more broadly with journalism and reporting. When you're talking to someone years after something has happened, sometimes memories can be a little bit fuzzy, or you can talk to multiple people and they can have different accounts of what happened. Ultimately, it was really easy to overcome. Just sometimes a little bit of a challenge at first, because if you work hard enough, you talk to enough people, or you do enough research, you'll be able to find information and be able to verify it or be able to get pretty close. So it's not so difficult. But I would say if I had to pick early on in Tony's Japanese career, where it was a little bit longer ago, but Tony was talking about the earthquake and tsunami, the triple disaster in 2011 in the Tohoku region. And I just wanted to note that there are a couple middle chapters on that in the book. And that was also a little bit challenging to research. Thankfully, I had this amazing resource. It was a book edited by Jeff Kingston on the earthquake and tsunami and the country's recovery efforts. And so I leaned heavily on that in addition to a lot of the reporting that I did. But so that's an example of off the field, bigger than baseball stuff that I think was just so important to highlight in the book, because everyone here loves baseball. We know how important it is in bringing people together, as you mentioned, and how universal of a language baseball is. But when it comes down to it, it is a game that people play with balls and a bat. And there are people like Tony are lucky to have done that for a living. But when you're talking about life and death and people losing family members and other loved ones and property and not being able to have electricity and all that stuff, is, I think we'd all agree easily, is way more important. And so I wanted the book to be about much more than baseball, where baseball was a lens through which we could tell these more weighty universal stories.
Mm-hmm. Almost like giving context, you know what I mean, of what's most important. I think that one thing that I'm interested in, and I this might come off a little bit silly. Have either of you ever heard of the movie The Rookie?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dennis
with
Quaid.
our guy Dennis Quaid. Now, not a full same thing or anything like that, but I'm wondering now, you know, from Japan, having that success, having that career there, everything that went for you, you know, you now are going backwards. And it's similar to Dennis Quaid in that movie. He's very proud with where he is, right? He didn't necessarily go to the majors or anything like that, but he eventually gives it a shot and whatnot. You go back to it. What kind of made that arise? What was the process? What was the vibe even of going from Japan and then saying, oh, cool, I have an offer. You know, I'm ready to go back and accomplish my original dream of playing professional baseball in the major leagues.
Well, I think for my own personal development, it really was me grabbing onto where I'm at, being, you know, that whole saying, like, be where your feet are. And I took grasp of that when I got the second opportunity to come back after my first year and they put me in the bullpen. I really sold out to what they were telling me, what they were teaching me, and where I was in the world and where I was in my own personal life. And getting back to the big leagues was just a culmination of me continuing to develop myself where I was, without looking too far into the future and trying to play this what if game. I was very focused on the day to day. I was focused on who I was and who my teammates were and what we were trying to accomplish where I was in Tokyo. So with that, next thing you know, flash forward after 2011, 12, 13, 14, it's 2015, and I'm throwing the ball better than I've ever thrown it before in my life. I'm healthier than I've ever been before in my life. I'm stronger. And it's all a culmination of the development and work that I put in away from the field when the game wasn't on. And at the time, you know, I wasn't focused on anything other than what we were doing. We were pursuing a championship. We were pursuing the Central League championship, which ended up being the first one for our team in 14 years. And after throwing the ball so well, it wasn't a surprise to me when towards the end of that season, the attention started coming and the real messages started coming through different avenues to, hey, teams are interested, you know, the major leagues are an option. This is something that is, if you're going to have an opportunity to do what you know, as 10, 11, 12-year-old Tony always wanted to do, like, this is the opportunity to do it. And so when the season came to an end, it was no surprise to anybody that was involved, that knew me, coaches, players, family members. There was no surprise that I was going to take that leap and throw my hat in the ring to say, you know what, like, this is something that ever since I was a little kid, I've dreamed of doing and I've wanted to do. I have the opportunity to do it. I have my opportunity sitting right in front of me to throw my hat in the ring with the world's best on the world's best stage of professional baseball, and to see what I'm worth, you know, in that respect, you know, not what I'm worth as a human being, but as a ball player and what I've put the work and energy into my entire life. So it wasn't a surprise when I made that leap after 2015 and signed with the Texas Rangers in 2016, made my, you know, debut at 32 years old. It just like how the book came apart. It was just a culmination of doing work every single day, focusing on what we have right in front of us at the time, and then reaping the rewards and reaping the benefits of it later on. I think it's a testament to, I'm going to pat myself on the back here, but it was a testament to me showing up and going to work every single day.
Mm-hmm.
Rain or shine, good or bad, through all the injuries, not letting myself get, in bad times, not letting myself, go into pity parties. And if I did, it was a real quick thing. It was a go home, complain about it. But once your head hits the pillow, tomorrow's a new day. Mm-hmm. So that was how I took it. And I think over the course of my career, when coaches or people talk to me, that one of the things that they can come out and say is that I was reliable and they knew I was going to show up that day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm wondering, can you discuss, you mentioned that the book discusses, your, right off the plane and whatnot. Can you talk a little bit about the dichotomy between arriving in Japan versus arriving back in the States for your first game that you've been working so hard for, obviously, and you already played professional overseas, don't get me wrong, but for Major League Baseball, your dream as a kid, between Japan and this, what was kind of the differences? What are some things that you noticed as you came back?
When I got off the plane in Japan, there was a general excitement. There was this new, there's a foreign guy coming. He's a new guy. He's ready to pitch. There was an excitement, it was, mm-hmm. But then coming back to the States, there was more of a, who the hell's this guy? There was just kind of more of like a side-eye approach to like, okay, like we don't really know what we're getting here, mm-hmm. Like there was, it was interesting, obviously there was definitely interest from reporters and, the media was interested about, who I was, trying to figure out what I was. But from the players there, in Japan, the players were like, okay, the Japanese players were like, okay, here comes another foreigner. Here comes another guy we've seen it a million times. And then, coming back to the States, they're like, okay, like there's this guy that's never been in the big leagues and now he's got a big league deal coming out of Japan. Like, what are we doing here? Mm-hmm. There was just kind of more of like a side-eye approach from my peers. Mm-hmm. So it was I kind of realized quickly that it was important for me to, get to know people, be myself, and let them know who I was, and then ultimately prove myself in between the lines.
Yeah, and that's where I bring up my comparison to the rookie, making your debut at age 32. A bit older, but even still, first season, 2.09 ERA across 60 innings pitched. So it seems like you had quite the return. I'm wondering, you mentioned kind of a little bit of skepticism, like who is this guy coming from Japan? Do you think there's been a change at all? And I guess this question can kind of go for both of you, actually, both Aaron and Tony. A change in how people view players coming from Japan back then versus now, whether it be Japanese players or it be American players who went overseas and then returned back, because I know that, my favorite team, the Padres, have had some of their own, like Robert Suarez, Nick Martinez, just to name a couple that, came back from overseas and they've still had these careers. Do you think anything like that's changed at all?
100%. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I was a catalyst for this movement, mm-hmm. but
take credit, take full credit. No,
let me get a little. Let me, pat myself. This is all.
Robert Suarez owes you like half of his check.
Yeah, exactly. Otani, those guys, all those guys.
If I could collect on anything that Nick, Robert or Miles Mikolas have made over their career, I'll give them my address. Make check.
You probably wouldn't be on this podcast right now. You'd probably be on vacation somewhere, just on the beach.
I'd be interviewing from some nice warm beach, except I'm working currently in Omaha. It's when I first arrived in Japan, the old adage was it was still a place for older ball players in the States to go and, kind of finish out their career. Almost, older guys kind of getting put out to pasture from the MLB and moving over to career for some more stable money and just a way to elongate the baseball life a little bit more. Obviously before me, there was guys like Colby Lewis and Ryan Vogelsong to note. They were, and then when I was one of the very few in the game to not have any MLB experience, to start there and then come back mm-hmm. and play in the MLB. But since those days, since 2015, we've seen a lot more guys come, a lot more American-born players, or even Latin-born players who haven't had Major League Baseball or careers or a couple innings here and there, come back to the United States and have a lot of success. Like you mentioned, Nick Martinez, Robert Suarez, Miles Mikolas has done that. Can't think, there's been a few other guys that have done it, but the scope of baseball and the talent level of Japan has risen, and the way that guys can go over there who have major league talent, like Nick and Miles and Robert, they have major league talent, but for the time being, when they're in the States, they don't have that opportunity to consistently log innings or log at bats and prove themselves. So they go to Japan, they get that. Matt Moore did it. Matt Moore went to SoftBank for a year. He came back and he's had a lot of bullpen success with Texas, and, coming back and kind of reinventing himself as a left-handed reliever after he started off so well as a starter in the Tampa Bay days. But it's just, there's more eyeballs on Japan now. The ability to develop as a player by logging more innings and at bats is more available. And when guys are successful, they're still young enough to still catch the eyeballs of the United States to say, this guy is somebody we can invest in and continue to develop. So since my days, you have seen a little bit more, and like the WBC helps with that, with adding to the overall scope widening on the game of baseball around the world. But I believe the pathway from Japan to the United States has gotten a lot larger.
Yeah, I love this question. I think it's such a fascinating trend, and it's so fitting for baseball versus the world discussion to have. I mean, we talk about it in the book, and there was a perception that it was kind of like out of sight, out of mind, especially if you're an American or other gaijin in Japan and you leave and you're not in North America anymore and you're in your prime, then you pretty much have to set the world on fire in terms of dominating, which Tony ultimately did. But you had to pretty much do that in order to get attention stateside, and now it couldn't be more different. We see it with all these guys that you just mentioned, the increasing trend, and I think it's a really good thing and an exciting thing, and Japanese baseball is so good. It's such a high level of play. They've called it quadruple A for a long time, but I don't even think that gives it the respect that it deserves. We saw what Tony was able to do, parlaying that dominant 2015 season into that excellent rookie year that you cited, where Tony was trusted in high leverage situations really fast. He earned the trust of Jeff Bannister really quickly, and was all of a sudden coming in games against the Angels that were stacked at the time, and Red Sox with the bases loaded, and just stranding runners, getting outs, and just doing it like it was normal. And that was his first year. And I think it's really cool that he was one of the early pitchers to kind of usher in that trend. And it's so exciting to see now all these guys go to Japan, prove themselves, and then when they get to the majors, they're not just barely surviving, they're thriving, like you see firsthand with Robert Suarez.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. Oh, I've been seeing it firsthand, man. It's been joyous as a Padres fan, let me tell you. Yeah, I think that if anything, it shows that there's just so many different paths to take. And I think that, what you mentioned, the World Baseball Classic, you saw like on the world stage, the ratings, the excitement for baseball. I mean, this show is called Baseball versus the World, of course, so this is very fitting, but it does really feel like baseball has almost quietly, dare I say, expanded a lot more than I think it gets credit for, in a lot of ways overseas, with the different players that come into Major League Baseball itself. It does feel like it's a little bit more of a worldwide game than I think people think. What do you guys say about that?
I think Major League Baseball has done a really good job of expanding its reach across the globe. Like I touched on with the WBC, we're seeing a lot of players from all corners of the earth really put their skill sets on display, and it's hard to ignore when guys come over and do well against top-notch talent. With the rise of metrics, it's also hard to ignore. Way back when, it was always up to just scouts saying, "Oh well, he's good here, but I don't see him, competing at a major league level." And then all of a sudden now we take that same guy and we add metrics in it, and when you could sit there and go, holy cow, like exit velocity is above average, spin rate's above average, like what he's doing is actually like he has tangibles that are right in par or above average of other Major League Baseball players. So we're going to give them the option. When young players now ask me, hey, like the draft's only down to 20, and I don't think I'm going to get drafted, like what should I do? And my answer is always like, go to a facility, get your metrics taken, and mail it to, or email it and send it to every single organization around the world that will accept it. Because if there are metrics that get met, you're going to get a call. You're going to get an opportunity to play. So I think a lot less talent is slipping through the cracks like it used to. Like it doesn't take scouts traveling to every corner of the earth just to find guys and hope to run into somebody. Now there's so much technology that it kind of comes to us. So I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that MLB and Major League organizations have done so much to try to uncover as much talent as they possibly can, that a lot of that talent's not slipping through the cracks like it used to.
Just to chime in for a second, I think that's so interesting because scouting famously was so subjective for so long, and I mean, you saw the ridiculous stereotypes that I think are in the book and definitely in the Moneyball movie, where it's like, oh, this person, his girlfriend, she's attractive, so that boosts his stock. In my mind as a scout, or ridiculous examples like that. But no, I just think that's so cool and interesting that now with the technology and the analytics and numbers, it's like you're not going to discount a guy who went to Japan in his prime and was there for a year or two just because he took a non-traditional route, if he can show you that his spin rate is whatever revolutions per second, or for example. So it's just like, okay, you don't believe in me, I took a different route. Well, my numbers will prove to you that you should believe in me. And so it's basically like demanding that these organizations give you their attention.
Tony, I'm wondering, not even necessarily for you, but do you find or do you remember seeing or being around people who had like those really tired narratives? And granted, Moneyball, I imagine, a little bit of hyperbole, it's a movie and whatnot, but did you come across scouts or folks, obviously you don't have to name, that use things like, oh, this guy, he likes eating fast food sometimes, or whatever it is, right? Like these sort of weird biases or just fraught ways of analyzing the sport?
Well, I mean, I met, me and so many guys like me, we meet those stereotypes right away once we get into professional baseball. Unless you're a top prospect, you get, people will knock you down. Just, scouts and stuff will knock you down because it's easy to do so. I remember seeing scouting reports on me saying, like Tony was successful at like A ball or double A, but most scouts see him as only, being able to, compete against, lower level players, where there's, sure enough, like there's fastball velocities and like breaking balls, stuff like that guys can see and like, oh, he doesn't have that good of a breaking ball. But at the end of the day, my numbers kept adding up, because there's still these intangibles that are, like heart and hustle. How do you measure that? You can only sit there through eyeballs. And so there's things that I felt like I brought to the mound that a lot of my peers that were getting looked at also that didn't bring. They didn't bring. There's guys that I can point to. I'm not going to sit here and call guys out, but there's guys along the way that I was like, this guy doesn't have grit. This guy doesn't have a backbone. He doesn't have that aggressive mentality. Sure, he's got great stuff, but he doesn't have what it takes to really bring the fight to the table. He's just more of like a, it's just, and I always felt like I was that player. Like I didn't have the best stuff according to the scouts, but I brought the fight to the table and I never backed down. I was going to sit there and challenge everybody every single time I went out, and I wasn't afraid to do so. I was never afraid to throw a pitch down the middle on a 3-0 count. Like I was always willing to challenge guys. And I feel like that, sure, I got burnt times doing that, but more than not, I feel as a pitcher, my aggressiveness as with what I had won out more times than not. And I feel like I was a winning pitcher because of it. I felt guys like to play behind me because I, win, lose, or draw, I was going to go out there and compete in a timely manner. I wasn't going to walk around the mound and hum and haw and be terrified of getting up there. No, I was going to get the ball and I was going to, all right, that one, I messed up on that one. I got burnt. We're now losing, but hey, give me the ball back. Let's get back into this. So I feel like guys like playing behind me because I was doing it in a timely fashion. I was going to lose or win in a timely fashion. Guys knew that they were going to get out of that park in about 3 hours.
Amen, man. And I really love that you guys bring up, especially Tony, the metrics and things that we could actually use, because it's funny, like this past offseason, Yoshinobu Yamamoto got paid so much money, and I have people in my life that were like, but he's never played against major league competition. Like, well, this isn't a tremendous overpay and all these sort of things and these biases. And co-founder of this lovely website, Just Baseball, RM Layton, I remember like we got a couple texts that he's just like, there's no pitcher like this. Like, I don't care who he faced. Like, if you just look up the movement and stuff, and it feels like that's kind of an attitude that Major League Baseball has, because you see guys come over from Japan all the time, whether it be Japanese players or American players like yourself that played there for a little bit. So it's just really fascinating, I think, on a number of levels, seeing how the game is evolving and changing, and it doesn't matter where you play. There are opportunities, it seems. Now, though, I want to talk about, you played 3 seasons with the Rangers, then 1 with the Cubs. Upon retiring, I guess, what do you do after that? You know what I mean? This is what you've been working your whole life for, Tony. This is what you get to, you retire officially. What's kind of that first day like? And then what's kind of the path after that?
Man, it's almost like I kind of blacked out during those moments, because it's definitely an emotional ride. Mm-hmm. When you decide to walk away from something you've done your entire life. I talked with a good friend of mine, John Hester. He was a catcher with the Angels and the Diamondbacks. And he always, now he's a smart guy, Stanford graduate. He's got a good job now, but me and him talk, and he made a good point. And he said, he said, I envy the guys that had a plan right away, whether that was going to work for dad's, roofing company or whatever it might have been. Those guys that had a plan right away out of the game. And he's completely right. Like, because there's a moment in time where you're sitting there at home. Luckily enough, I had made enough money to take a deep breath and not have to rush into anything. And because there's this time where you're looking around, you going, well, now what the hell do I do? Mm-hmm. Like I've got my family, I had young kids, and that's where my main focus was. But when they're out of the house at school, now you're just kind of looking around, trying to replace that sense of urgency, trying to replace that adrenaline rush that had been coursing through, my body for the last 14, 15 years. Mm-hmm. And now it's just gone. Like, there's no more phone calls. There's no more panicked phone calls to get the bullpen hot. There's no more, you got to go here. You're traveling here. You're doing this. Now we're playing. Like, it just comes to a complete halt. And my buddy Jason Grilli says it best. He says, this game is borrowed, and we're lucky enough to borrow it for a certain time, because the game marches on, and no matter how good you are, you could be Babe Ruth, but the game marches on. It's not going to come to a halt just because you stop playing. So in those moments, baseball forgets about you, and you're just kind of left to your own devices at that moment, saying, okay, well, what do I do now? So the first few days were me getting home, sitting down in my house and just kind of trying to relax as much as possible and trying to just enjoy where I'm at. And then quickly you just get into normal life of, grocery stores and kids in school and, the everyday life that you always knew was coming, but now you're finding out that, oh man, I don't know if I was prepared for this part. And so, I got into like mountain biking, and then COVID hit, which, really quick. I retired 2019, and then 2020 hit, COVID hit, and everything came to a halt. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't alone in the fact that now there's over 6 million people that have been, out of a job and furloughed, or, and the entire world took a huge pause. So I was just another person trying to navigate that space, just like the rest of the world was. But luckily, also in that time, once I retired, it was before I even announced, the Yakult Swallows had gotten wind that I was done. And my boss now, the guy who signed me, Masayuki Okamura, we call him Mike, Michael Okamura, he caught wind. He's been signing foreigners for 30 plus years in Japan for a long time. He caught wind that I was done, and he reached out and was like, "Hey, are you done?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Okay, do you want to come work for us?" And so that happened pretty quickly. So at least I had that transition into getting back into something pretty quick. COVID hit and kind of hit the skids on all of that, but at least I had found something very quick to get back into and kind of occupy my mind, and also being still involved in the game.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I mean, I didn't even, for some reason, like the dates 2019 didn't line up for me. It's like, that must be pretty wild to retire, and then it's like, oh, the world ended. Like, that's pretty wild. Like, that's pretty wild to have that transition.
So technically I did retire and the world came to a stop.
Exactly. It says a lot.
We don't know if it's correlated. It might be.
Exactly. I'm wondering now, to go back to Aaron for a second.
That's the butterfly effect, right?
Yeah, butterfly. It's just once Tony Barnette retired, it's like the narrator.
One small flap of the wings, and I changed it all.
The narrator just comes in, and they're like, "And you never want to get like the ESPN 30 for 30 voice."
Be careful; they might be calling it the Tony Barnette virus.
Yeah. I'm wondering now, going over the course of this journey, do you guys have a single favorite moment for the book? I guess I should say specifically, like, what was your favorite, kind of thing to look back at and say that part in the book? If I had to show one part, you know what I mean? If so one page or one chapter or something along that line, what would it be?
Would it be too easy for me to say the star jump behind my right shoulder? But that was one pretty hilarious one that's documented near the end of, I think it's chapter 17, the chapter that covers the 2015 Swallows that Tony and Tetsudo Yamada and a couple other players led to the Japan series that year. This is him celebrating after they eliminated the rival Yomiuri Giants to get to the Japan series. And it was immortalized all over Twitter with all these ridiculous photoshops that people did. I think it loosely translated into English. It was like Tony Barnette crappy Photoshop or something like that. And all these fans just ran with it. And it was pretty hilarious. If you search that Japanese hashtag, and it's in the bibliography, but that's one of my favorites. I'll go to Tony, but then I'll try to think of another one.
For me, I can't really pinpoint because there was so much in there that I absolutely love, but sitting here now with that question in mind, like, a lot of my favorite parts are the parts that like kind of choke me up a little bit rehashing them, because you kind of forget and you kind of get, for me, it sends me right back into those moments of struggle that I was going through in that time, dealing with, injuries and, just let down, and, just realizing like, man, like what is a ball player, like, and I'm not alone in this, like what ball players go through that people don't see. You hear about injuries, but you don't get to see behind the scene of guys being sick and tired of being sick and tired. You don't, and, for me, it's special for me because now my children have a written script of what happened and what I went through to get to where I was. Because now, as a father, and my daughters are 10 and 8, it's hard for me to replicate the work ethic that I put in when it came to baseball, and it's something that they'll never get to see. And it's something that they'll never be able to witness firsthand because they were so small when it happened. They won't understand. But at least now they have a chronology of what I did to be able to be in the situation I am for us to have what we have. And that's really special for me. It's, when I inevitably leave this world, they'll be able to look back and be like, this is my dad. This is, as large or as small as you make him out to be in the public and the baseball eye. But like, for those two, like, they can look at this fondly, hopefully proudly, and say like, this is my dad. This is what he did. And he went through trials and tribulations, and he bet on himself. And not just my own children, but if there's anybody that ever hears my story or, hears about me as a ball player And if I can inspire one kid to, to believe in themselves and to bet on themselves when the insurmounting pressure is that they're not good enough. If they can look at that story that Aaron wrote and my story as a ball player and say, you know what, like he did it, so can I. If there's just one person, one kid out there that can think that, then, it's a solid victory.
Wow,
So beautiful.
Speaking of choked up, yeah, my gosh, that was a beautiful way to look at it. That's amazing, man.
Really, I don't know how to follow that, but can I add a couple instances that? Thank you. So one of them, Tony talked about it in the book where he still gets chills thinking about it when the Swallows fans were just chanting his name down the stretch run during that 2015 season. It's just such vivid imagery. And I think, how can you not get emotional thinking about that? Just that he still gets chills almost 10 years later thinking about that. And it just, I'm sure, you could tell me if I'm wrong, Tony, I'm sure that will never leave you, that feeling. And the other thing I wanted to touch on was, it's not a specific instance, but it's talked about in the book where Tokyo essentially becomes a second home to Tony and Hillary. And that's where I'm talking about their midnight bike rides through Oyama Cemetery, and the going to the Imperial Palace, and just when there's not really many people around, and Tony had a quote where you have this big city all to yourself, and you don't even necessarily always know where you're going, but that's part of the point, where you're just wandering around, getting lost, finding yourself, getting lost again, and just soaking it all in. And so while it's not a specific example, that's one of the things also that I take away from it. Just one of my favorite things to think about.
Well said.
Yeah, Aaron. I mean, like you said, like in that stretch run when you have an entire stadium behind you, it's stuff that ball players, it's stuff that we live for. We live to perform. We live to, please the fans and win for them. And you see, baseball and sports alike, they do such a great job of showcasing what the fans are doing and how excited they are in those moments. And it's just something that you can't, as a single individual, you can't force it. It only comes from you doing your job day in and day out and doing it better than somebody else, and giving to the fans what the fans desire. And that's winning. And that's pretty much it. The fans want to win and they want to have a good time doing it. And so when you get into that situation where, I mean, for instance, like perfect example would be when Paul O'Neill, one of his last games in Yankee Stadium, and the entire Yankee Stadium is just chanting Paul O'Neill. I mean, you can see it on his face. Like he's this hard-nosed ball player. Paul O'Neill's one of my favorites because he was just such a hard-nosed dude, just played the game the right way, played it hard, rarely showed emotion. But like in that moment, you could tell that there was no running from it. There was no running from that experience of touching the hearts of an entire organization that it's really hard to, to touch with the Yankee faithful. Like you got to be a special person for those people to give you that kind of homage. So now with that said, it's something that as a ball player, if you only get it once, it's something you remember the rest of your life. And I'll always remember the way that the stadium sounded as I entered those ball games and those big situations as we were heading for the Central League title. And, it's just something that I'll never get again. I'll never relive that ever again as an athlete. And it's something that most people will never understand unless they're in that moment. And I was fortunate enough to be in that moment. And I was fortunate enough to have that happen and be able to perform for the Yakult faithful. And when we got that final out to win the Central League Championship, you just see the videos that get posted and you just see how excited and happy these fans are. The place erupted, and it's just such a fun thing to be a part of as a ball player when your actions and your performance makes an entire stadium of 30, 40,000 people just erupt.
Well said. Well said. And you know what? I think that's a great place to end, guys. This has been really awesome talking to both you, Aaron, and both you, Tony. This is great. Everybody, go check out the book. Again, to repeat the title, of course, A Baseball Gaijin, Chasing a Dream to Japan and Back. You get it wherever your books are sold. Forward by Don Nomura as well in this one. And just...
Can I do a quick plug, Javi?
Yeah, I was
Sorry.
So I was just about to ask you to plug one more thing. Go ahead.
Oh, my bad. I just wanted to say that still you have a few days. If for viewers out there who want to purchase a hardcover copy, Tony and I are doing a giveaway contest. If anyone purchases a hardcover copy through August 17th, they're entered into possibly winning either signed baseball cards by Tony or a second signed book. So you have a few days left, and we'd love for you to enter the contest if you're interested.
Go check that out, folks. I know I will be. And of course, with that said, that about does it for this edition, the first ever 14th episode of Baseball versus the World, a podcast how baseball relates to the rest of the world and the rest of the world relates to baseball. Go check out the show on Twitter at Baseball vs. World. Same thing on Instagram as well for updates on the show, clips, and all that stuff. You can follow me at Javipeno on Twitter, at JAVIIPENO. And also, Aaron, you can check him out by Aaron Fish on Twitter /X as well. Tony, Aaron, this has been a blast. And until next time, everybody who's been watching and listening, stay golden and stay loving this beautiful worldwide sport of baseball.